and now a beneficent fact. Did you know that Isaac Newton, one of the most famous scientists in history, spent more time studying alchemy and number symbolism than modern science? This interest in alchemy started during his childhood when he was boarding in the attic of an apothecary's shop. However, much of his writings on alchemy may have been lost in a fire in his laboratory, leaving the true extent of his work in this area unknown. Newton even suffered a nervous breakdown during his period of alchemical work. Alchemy has been largely ridiculed and dismissed as pseudoscience, and its practitioners were often labeled as charlatans or fraudsters. However, recent scholarship has shown that alchemists made significant contributions to science and medicine, including the discovery of elements and the development of pharmaceutical drugs. Alchemy's focus on the transformation of matter and the study of the universe's hidden potential remains relevant today, and its earlier practitioners deserve a serious re-evaluation of their work. For more videos like this, subscribe to our YouTube and TikTok channels. With this design, there is a slight smell of burnt air, but almost no sense of carbon emissions when putting your nose directly up to the exhaust. The brilliance of Bendel's design is in its simplicity and ability to replicate natural phenomenon. Further proof that nature is the most efficient energy machine. This is a plasmoid thunderstorm generator gas engine retrofit and industrial engine retrofit. They are proof of concepts for clean and efficient energy. This retrofit will turn any carbon engine into clean and super efficient oxygen factories, using only gas for the initial start of the engine. For more details on how the Bendel engine works or how plasmoids are the future of renewable clean energy, subscribe to my TikTok or YouTube channel. I constantly push the bar by introducing you to forbidden and obscure knowledge. Take the red pill and subscribe now.
Well, so cymatics would be the closest thing in a physical medium that we could use in order to visualize the material shifting and creating more coherent geometries. Some people work with salt, some people work with Sedona red rock, some people work with shungite powder. Each one of these types of powdered minerals will potentially have a different impact when different frequencies are applied to them. So this geometry is from the plasmoid unification model is now getting imprinted into the electromagnetic field, and the EMF mic is proving it. So can I see someone's cell phone again? Your cell phone? And then we'll just put the phone into the field. Look at that. So this is your brain. This is your brain on EMF. Don't do EMF. Just kidding. You can do it. Just, create some boundaries.
Yeah, nothing new under the sun. Sorry? With permission of the owner. Can we pass this around? Okay, yeah, so you're the one who came up with the idea. It's your responsibility if it goes missing.
It's such a special thing. And I have to thank the Matsumoto family for entrusting me with the project. Far in the universe, nuclear collapses very often take place by the gravitational force after stars consume their fuel. Since the electromagnetic force is about 40 orders of stronger than the gravitational force, it should be easy to induce similar nuclear collapses by the electromagnetic force in laboratory. But we never knew until now how to do that. Recently, the author, Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto, discovered a nuclear collapse which was induced by the electromagnetic force in laboratory during studying the mechanisms of so-called cold fusion phenomena. Several kinds of nuclear reaction which were directly induced by the electromagnetic force, called electronuclear reactions, ENRs, were found so far to occur in a special state of hydrogen clusters called itonic clusters, or micro ball lightning. The nuclear collapse was one of the most remarkable reactions among ENRs, called the electronuclear collapse. Furthermore, very amazingly, completely broken materials by ENC were found to be regenerated to thin tubes and films of conventional elements such as carbon, oxygen, and iron. The latter process is called electronuclear regeneration.
So those are your crenellated spheres?
Okay, on the subject of the crenellated spheres. In several systems, if you have, at the bottom of a yin vortex, you are, in my view, at that point, you're twisting the ether in such a way that at that point, it starts to unravel matter. So in my presentation, I showed you this structure where I placed a Mars gas, which has a special component in there, which is released when you burn the gas. And that produces this magnetohydrodynamic structure, and it has a vector down to a point where there's like, it's a torsion field, and it has a focus where in the structure of the physical vacuum at a quanta scale on a toroidal level above, there's the interaction between that vector and the toroidal vector of the structure of the physical vacuum above, okay? And at that point, it literally unwinds matter. That's the yin pulling force. It desires to take from the environment to create life. Okay, so that is disrupting matter. Now, any matter in that position will have the hidden matter within the energy ripped from it. And this is what Nina Kaligina was doing when she was using Psi-Force, which we have the capability to use. She was able to move material around, but she was also able to stop the heart of a frog and restart the heart of a frog with her intention through her hands. And then when one of her colleagues said, well, you know, I'm not really believing this, you know, try and do it to me, she did it and sent him into cardiac arrest. And they had to do CPR. So that's extracting chi. And it's just sad because there's two horrendous weapons that are possible with this technology that almost certainly have been developed. And you don't know it's even possible, but in certain circles, it's just accepted as part of things you can do, right? So it's able to extract that. And what happens when you extract that hidden energy within the matter? The electrons just fall off and the matter starts disassembling. And it disassembles in the most, in my view, most stable nucleon clusters. So it disassembles into protons, helium alpha particles, and carbon. So because you're changing the distortion of the physical vacuum, and all energy comes from difference in change in the distortion of the physical vacuum. Doesn't matter whether it's chemical energy or nuclear energy. Okay, so, but I can tell you our experiment called Ultra Experiment, it's highly well defined. A 3-year-old can learn to conduct it and do the experiment within 7 minutes. It works 100% of the time if you follow the instructions, and you get lighter and heavier elements, and I wasn't blown up. It's called the least action process. Right? So the yang side, that's the brighter light in your Masonic temples. You had the sun force in all of the ancient religions, right? The swastika, right? That disassembles and unwinds the trapped light, okay? Then it can be unwound in such that the connection between the clusters in the particular nucleus fall apart based on their strength of binding. Okay. Then it goes through a wormhole, which is in page 91 in Matsumoto's book, which he worked out from 11 years of his research. Okay, goes through the wormhole, comes through to the yin. So the yang is disassembling matter. It goes through a wormhole. It's not interacting with any matter. This is literally able to go through all of the matter you can possibly imagine without interaction.
And the wormhole connects the center of the yin to the center of the yang?
Yes. You getting it? And on the other side, on the yin, it assembles matter. So there, in this particular experiment, which I think ran for 90 seconds or 300 seconds, one or the other, on that particular side, you don't want to run it long because it gets confused. This is confused, right? There's lots of experiment things that went on all over the place, over and over and over again. So it ends up being homogeneous. It just looks like rock. Okay, so it comes around the other side, and on that side, inside the Vesica Pisces, inside the golden ratio line, there is exactly a two-arm spiral galaxy structure, which was replicated by other parties. And inside those places, but it's not that the Magatarm is up here, and then the other side it's down there. It is the 69. It is the yin-yang, even on that level. It literally looks like a 6 and a 9. On that side, there was calcium and no boron. So if it's a contamination in the system and both vortexes are the same, you should see calcium and boron here and calcium and boron here, but you don't. You see boron here with no calcium, which is aluminium minus oxygen, and over here you see aluminium plus oxygen, which is some isotopes of calcium in the absence of boron, and that is the yin side, the creative force in the universe. You literally cannot have a universe which does not have yin and yang. And because it's fractal, every yang has a yin and a yang, and every yin has a yang and a yin. Okay, there's female in all of us, and there's male in all of us. Get over it.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So, the least action process defines that you are reorganizing the nucleons in a way that doesn't involve the Coulomb barrier. It's irrelevant. Forget about it. Right? Forget about it. And it comes around the other side. And so you're taking apart matter, that has energy, it's captured, and it's released in the reorganization of the matter on the other side. There might be a net-net.
Characteristics of ball lightning, you find them in crop circles, and you'll find them at comet sort of impacts where there's the same multi-axis shear, and they're producing these things, so they're concurrent, with everything else.
So can I finish the question? So I was wondering, is it potentially that one of the spheres that was welded could have contaminants of a magnetic material, and that's causing the isopotential lines to steal the plasma, increasing the heat on one side? Because you did say, like with magnets, it can...
No, what's happening is, remember, there's two things happening inside. So it's counter-rotational spin.
Yeah.
So you've got the vacuum pulling through your water in its gas phase, pulling through plasmoids, right? Mm-hmm. My theory on it, I think at the moment it would be brave for anyone to state an absolute, right? Because even though I've been working on it, it's still everything I think is a theory, and it fits into my theory. But what I believe is that the plasmoids, when they come, when you have the exhaust gas interacting with the plasmoids coming through on the inside sphere, there's a point, and it's almost a sort of a linear point where the temperature changes. I believe that is because as it's coming out of the exhaust, it interacts and to build up the charge in the plasmoids that are actually coming through. And once they're built up to charge and big enough, they steal the heat. That's my theory. Like they actually get to a point where they're absorbing the heat. And that's why it's on a line this way, even though they're spinning that way. A really interesting thing we found that because we had the temperature probe, even if you stick like a Jubilee clip or something, for a sampling point on the thunderstorm generator, and this is what it's been frustrating with welders and that, because they just, I'm just welding up they think they're just welding up an exhaust gas system, but you're not. You're welding up like a violin, right? So the transitions have to be right, and there has to be a lot of attention to detail, so you don't have any points at which you are discharging, right? And the whole annealing process is to get rid of those anomalies. Because what I wanted to do was have everyone have the same thunderstorm generators. We intend to put 25 of them around the world. I think we've got about, and Bob's got, 6 or 7 homes for the new batch. and we've made homes for the previous batch around the world, so people do independent testing. But it's so important with the original test that everyone's testing on the same prototype. Because we've had sort of people go, look, this thing doesn't work as it should, and say, well, what's it made out of? Is the first question. I can't weld stainless steel, so I did the steel. what could possibly go wrong? Well, it's not stainless steel. So, it's not the catalyst it should be, because it's got its own electromagnetic field, and it's not a normal field, right? And because it's so sensitive, but you also, when you put that on, you're changing the frequency. If you put a clip on it, or you put a bracket on it, right, to earth, that's deadly. The one good thing about the generators, they're sitting on rubber, which insulates, because the plasmoids will go to earth. They'll go to Mother Earth, right? They'll go to ground, right? So the insulation is a very important factor, not to short circuit it. And the subtle thing, we went to a lab in North Carolina State University, and what they did was they added a pipe which changed the frequency, and then they put it in the fume cabinet, and the fume cabinet is grounded to earth. Right, and they say, why does it work, Malcolm? I said, send me a picture, because I knew what had happened. You don't buy a violin or, say, a slide trombone, and then change the side of the slide, the length of the slide, and expect it to operate in the same manner. This is tuned to the exact frequency it needs to be. If you take the 10 most abundant elements on the earth, when we run from the water and we do our cavitation, we find the 10 same in abundancy, the same abundancy as you find in the earth. As above, so below. It's absolutely extraordinary. And it's so simple. Yeah. But here we have the Hutchison effect, right, which is demonstrating that colour. Right? Now, Solomon's molten sea was made of that colour, and it's also, if you like, the reddy purple robes of the priests, who were insulated carts opening up the Solomon's molten sea, which I reverse engineered. And would you believe that there's 2,000 baths of water in Solomon's molten sea? But
Hello, everyone. I'm the Benefactor, and this is Beneficence TV, dedicated to providing you solid entertainment while keeping you informed. We are a progressive media outlet with the focus on providing thought-provoking content on forbidden knowledge, regarding topics such as Marxism, plasmoids, zero-point energy, vortex-based math, and anti-gravitics. Our aim is to combat the spread of dangerous misinformation and to educate on these intriguing and unconventional areas of study while separating fact from fiction. Join us on our journey of discovery and challenge conventional thinking here on Beneficence TV.
Welcome back to another live stream presentation I've cooked up for you on last minute. So I finished my work early and I wanted to... Oh, something wrong with the camera. Give me one second. There we go. So I wanted to give a quick presentation on the missing secrets of magnetism. And this is something that anybody working with free energy devices will find invaluable. When I discovered Ken Wheeler's Missing Secrets of Magnetism, I was immediately captivated. Now, I'm not going to be showing Ken Wheeler's actual videos. We will be watching Fractal Women's breakdown of Ken Wheeler's theories. And the reason for this is because I don't think Ken Wheeler even himself understands his own theories well enough to explain to a general audience. Fractal Woman, on the other hand, does a beautiful and brilliant way of breaking it down for laymen's like myself to understand. And she's done a wonderful job of enlightening me on the subject of magnetism. So we're going to jump into that. We're going to have 3 videos on the secrets of magnetism, and then we'll move on to the next subject. This is the only video with the AI voice, so bear with it. I'm seeing no sound here. Give me 1 second. Let me troubleshoot it real quick.
magnetism. I have been studying Wheeler's work for around 2 years now, and I have come to understand it, on my own terms. There are many out there that don't like Ken or his approach to teaching. He has lots of videos out there that aren't in particular order, so you have to sift through a lot of material to get to the good stuff. His book, Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism, suffers from the same problem. I prefer his videos. Yes, he gets angry sometimes, but anger is his gimmick. It is his thing. This is why he calls himself the angry photographer. Interestingly, he seems to have a lot of followers, and so his gimmick must be working. My intent here is to connect Ken Wheeler's ideas with some of my own ideas about the fractal nature of the universe. What do fractals have to do with magnets? Well, the most important property of fractals is the property of self-similarity. In mathematics, self-similar objects are objects that are approximately the same or similar at many different scales. In other words, the whole has the same shape as one or more of the parts. Many objects in nature seem to have this property. Here are just a few examples of objects in nature that exhibit the property of self-similarity. Notice how the object on the right seems to create a phi spiral. It is found that phi and fractals and nature are intimately related, which is why you see so many phi spirals in fractals. And in nature, magnets are the ultimate, real-life, example of self-similarity. For example, when you break a magnet exactly in half, between the North and South Pole, you don't get a North Pole and a South Pole. You get two new magnets, each with a North and a South Pole. In other words, you get two magnets that are self-similar to the original magnet. When you divide the new, smaller, magnets in half, you get more magnets that are self-similar to the original magnet. You see, magnets and fractals are intimately related due to the principle of self-similarity. This is why I became so interested in magnets and the teachings of Ken Wheeler. Ken understands and appreciates the relationship between fractals and magnets. The mathematical fractal that I am most interested in, and have been studying since 1985, is called the Mandelbrot set. This mathematical fractal also has the property of self-similarity in that, when you zoom into smaller regions of the Mandelbrot set, you find similar little mini-brots that look exactly like the original object. So where do we start with Ken Wheeler's Missing Secrets of Magnetism? Well, it all starts with the concepts of space and counter space. According to Ken Wheeler, the universe consists of two domains. One domain is referred to as space, and the other is referred to as counter space. In this manner, we live in a binary universe. As a computer scientist, I like to imagine that the universe is a computer of some sort. In computer science, 0 and 1 form the basis for the binary system. 0, on its own, is not very interesting. 1, on its own, is also not very interesting. It's only when we combine 0 and 1 that something interesting happens. By combining 0 and 1, we are able to encode the vast amount of information stored on our computers. Space and counter space are like the binary system. What is space? We all have a pretty good idea what space is. We have personal experience with space. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand what space is. Space manifests as distance between things. But what about counter space? The concept of counter space, on the other hand, is not very well understood. It is not taught in mainstream physics. It is not part of the curriculum. Counter space, I believe, is the missing secret of magnetism. Counter space, I believe, is the missing secret of gravity. Counter space, I believe, is the missing secret of cosmology and quantum mechanics. And counter space, I believe, is the missing secret of biology and life as we know it. Without counter space, none of these things could exist. Without counter space, there would be no 0 in the universal binary system. But what are the properties of counter space? What distinguishes counter space from space? To explain this, we need to understand the principle which I refer to as the principle of incommensurability. Ken Wheeler refers to it as field incommensurability. As I previously said, there are only two domains in the universe: space and counter space. The domains of space and counter space are incommensurate domains. What does this mean? To understand this, let's look at the definition for incommensurate. Incommensurate. Incapable of being compared. Having nothing in common. In other words, what one is, the other one isn't. So, whatever space is, counter space isn't.
As always, if you'd like to follow along with our presentation here, all the links and pictures are linked in a Google Doc in the description.
Whatever properties space has, counter space is not. For example, if space is big, then counter space is small. If space is expanding, then counter space is contracting. If space is Euclidean, then counter space is non-Euclidean. If space is phenomenon, then counter space is noumenon. Noumenon? What is this? Inaccessible to experience. Exists without sense or perception. Unknowable through human sensation. So if counter space is inaccessible through human perception or experience, then, why bother with it? What new physics does this bring? This is a very good question. Counter space is like zero in the binary system. How does one experience zero? Zero is the absence of things. Zero is nothing. How does one experience nothing? If we can't directly experience zero, then why should we bother with it? As I said earlier, without zero, we would not have the binary system. 1 is something, and 0 is nothing. Only through the direct experience of something can we indirectly perceive the notion of nothing. In a similar manner, only through direct experience with space can we indirectly perceive the notion of counter space. 1 would not exist without 0 as a reference. In a similar manner, space would not exist without counter space as a reference. This is, I believe, the missing secret of magnetism, gravity, quantum mechanics, biology, and life as we know it. So what does all this have to do with the fractal nature of the universe? I first came to understand counter space by studying the fractal geometry of the Mandelbrot set. Although I didn't originally know what to call it, thanks to Ken Wheeler, I now recognize the Mandelbrot set as a mathematical description of space.
So real quick, when Ken Wheeler refers to counter space, he's actually referring to a pressure differential in the ether. So, and this is my theory about magnets as well. They have a pressure differential at the north and south pole, causing a leakage of radiant energy from one pole to the other, an inflow and an outflow. And that's why, as of most systems, the inflow is a little bit stronger than the outflow, and that's why the North Pole is a little bit stronger than the South Pole, in my opinion.
And counter space. The black part of this image describes counter space, and the outer grayscale region and beyond describes space. Space, in of itself, is not very interesting. Counter space, in of itself, is also not very interesting.
So an interesting addition from Daniel Foster. He says, counter space is not zero. It has demonstrable properties. Naming it zero is scientific abandonment. I wouldn't exactly call it abandonment, maybe misinterpretation or in inaccuracy or misunderstanding. Abandonment really is a negative connotation and implies that you did it intentionally. And I agree with you. Counter space should, in theory, have properties, maybe not that we can observe, but that are observable through other interactions indirectly. Yeah, but that's just my 2 cents. But that's interesting that you said that. Thank you.
What is interesting is what happens between space and counter space. This is what makes things happen. This is what drives a magnet. This is what causes the sensation we call gravity. The interaction between space and counter space is phenomenon. The experience of life, the universe, and everything knowable is happening between space and counter space. The most important thing that I learned while studying nature and the Mandelbrot set is that the interface between space and counter space is always, and without fail, fractal. In other words, the path between space and counter space is non-linear in nature. This is directly observable and, as I will demonstrate in future videos, undeniable and irrefutable. The Mandelbrot set is a key to understanding the relationship between space and counter space. And it is the key to understanding Ken Wheeler's missing secrets of magnetism.
So we're not going to get into a lot of the playlist. It's pretty extensive, Fractal Woman's playlist on the missing secrets of magnetism. But if you see right here, her Mandelbrot set, she describes with math that, I believe the inside is space and the outside is counter space, or the barrier is counter space. I forget. But in a future live stream, we'll go over some more of her playlist. It's very fascinating. She's brilliant at breaking down some of these concepts. But yeah, that's just her work on the Mandelbrot set is very interesting. And I highly recommend you subscribe to Fractal Woman's YouTube channel. Let's move on to the next video, which is on the principle of incommensurability, which is very fascinating and key to understanding space and counter space relationships.
After my last video, it became clear to me that many are having a problem with the concept of counter space. Since counter space cannot be directly observed, then why bother with it, right? This is the most common concern. Also, some were concerned that I was teaching
Daniel says there are 3 types of gravity and 3 types of space: spatial, Morantial, and counter space. That's interesting. I know you did mention there are 3 types of gravity before. I'd be interested in learning more about that. If you have any links, feel free to post them, or I don't know if it'll let you post them on YouTube, but you can always email me at beneficencetv@gmail.com. And that's great content for future videos for sure. And I appreciate any input from my viewers on potential topics to cover. Sometimes it's hard to have your web out in all directions when you're so obsessed with a single topic. So I've been really preoccupied with the Rodin coil research lately. So any input that you guys want to share for future videos would be much appreciated.
something different than what Ken Wheeler is teaching. Well, this is not exactly true. What I'm doing is I'm teaching it differently. What would be the point of teaching it the same way that Ken does? If I taught it exactly the way he does, then you will be just as confused as you are now. And from the comments I've received in the first video, it does seem that there is still some confusion. So I'm going to teach it differently, and I'm hoping that my approach will add clarity to Ken's teachings. Of course, if I do say something that isn't in tune with what Ken is trying to say, then I'm sure he will tell me. Or you can sign up for
a forum. I recommend everybody sign up for a forum.
So I'm going to continue with my approach in an effort to help
especially if you're interested in sharing things with me. That's the easiest way to organize everything. And we can post comments and share ideas and stuff.
Ken defines a magnet as point non-specific incommensurate conjugate magnetodielectric coherent system. Wow, that is a mouthful. I'm going to say it again. Ken defines a magnet as point non-specific incommensurate conjugate magnetodielectric coherent system. In my previous video, we talked about the principle of incommensurability and what that means. Put simply, two domains are incommensurate if both domains have nothing in common. What one is, the other one isn't. For example, 0 is not 1 and 1 is not 0. The domain of 0 is nothing like the domain of 1 and vice versa. The domain of counter space is nothing like the domain of space and vice versa. Today we're going to talk about the conjugate relationship that exists between various domains of incommensurability. Ken describes the magnet as an incommensurate yet conjugate system. So what does this mean? First, let's have a look at the definition of the word conjugate. Conjugate. Joined together, especially in pairs. Acting or operating as if joined. Having features in common, but opposite or inverse. In other words, although space and counter space are incommensurate in principle, in the magnet, they're acting and operating as if they are joined. Space cannot exist without counterspace, and counterspace cannot be intuited without space. Both must exist for either to exist. This is the principle of incommensurability. Thus, the principle of incommensurability states the following. Incommensurate domains exist in nature. Incommensurate domains act or operate as if joined. Domain separators exhibit the property of self-similarity. In other words, they are fractal. This last one is new. This is my contribution to Ken Wheeler's Missing Secrets of Magnetism. In the previous video, I talked about how I came to understand the principle of incommensurability and indirectly the concepts of space and counterspace via the mathematical fractal called the Mandelbrot set. I will be using this as a teaching tool to help you understand and visualize these concepts. If you read my paper, The Mandelbrot Set as a Quasi-Black Hole, which will be linked in the description below, you will find that the black region of the Mandelbrot set are the points whose trajectories contract counterspatially when iterated through the function z equals z squared plus c. The black region of the Mandelbrot set, therefore, corresponds to the domain of counterspace. The outer gradient region are the points whose trajectories expand spatially, therefore, the outer gradient region corresponds to the domain of space. The Mandelbrot set, therefore, can be considered as a graph of the domains of space and counterspace. The fuzzy boundary that separates space and counterspace can be considered as a domain separator. It separates the domain of space from the domain of counterspace. In the model I'm proposing, all domain separators have the property of self-similarity, and therefore they are fractal in nature. Thus, self-similarity is an emergent property of the principle of incommensurability. In the case of the Mandelbrot set, all the pretty Mandelbrot set images that you can find on the internet all come from the region or domain separator. Domain separators are emergent properties of the interaction between space and counterspace. The domain of counterspace manifests in many ways. Next, I'm going to show you how I plan on unifying physics using the principle of incommensurability. Instead of unifying forces, what we're going to do instead is unify scales. Both space and counterspace can appear at many scales. So here's how I plan on unifying physics. Here is the first scale of unification. Dark matter corresponds to the domain of counterspace. Dark energy corresponds to the domain of space. Dark matter is counterspatial contraction, and dark energy is spatial expansion. The domain separator of dark matter and dark energy corresponds to the observable universe. The observable universe, therefore, is an emergent property of the interaction between space and counterspace. Now we're going to look at another scale of organized matter, the black hole. Here, the black hole.
So it sounds like counter space contracts and the dark energy, which I believe is 0-point energy or radiant energy, cosmic energy, expands.
Corresponds to the domain of counterspace. The not well-known photon sphere corresponds to the domain of space. The black hole can be thought of as counterspatial contraction, and the photon sphere can be thought of as spatial expansion. The domain separator in this case is the event horizon. The event horizon is an emergent property of the interaction between space and counterspace. Now we're going to move to the atomic scale. Here, the nucleus of the atom, i.e. the strong force, corresponds to the domain of counter space. The electron shells correspond to the domain of space. And the weak force plays the role of the domain separator. The domain of the weak force in the atom exactly separates space from counter space. As the weak force can bring things together, i.e. fusion, it can also tear things apart, i.e. fission. The poorly named weak force is an emergent property of the interaction between space and counter space. Here I would like to point out that the gradient region in the spatial domain of the Mandelbrot set is quantized. The electron shells within the atom are also thought to be quantized. In chaos theory, phase transitions are always quantized, that is, they appear suddenly without warning. The implication here is that the electron transitions are phase transitions, and this is why they are quantized. In other words, photons are not quantized, electron transitions are quantized within the atom. In short, the atom encapsulates all the features of the principle of incommensurability. That is, it has a counterspatial domain, it has a spatial domain, and it has a domain separator that has interesting behavior. So, here is a summary of my unification based on the principle of incommensurability and the self-similar nature of the universe. In future videos, I will show you more ways to apply the principle of incommensurability to physics, biology, and to nature in general. I will also be talking about the reciprocal nature of space and counter space.
I just want to pause this for a second and look at this graph here, or this list. This is very, very interesting. So we have counter space, which includes dark matter, black holes, and the strong force. And then we have space, which includes dark energy, photon spheres, and electron shells. And then the emergent properties, which is our observable universe, the event horizon of black holes. Previously, a photon sphere, I believe, is the outer shell of a black hole. And then the weak force. This is very interesting. I'm assuming the emergent properties are the properties that emerge when counter space contracts and space expands. Could be wrong on that, though.
Some people out there are trying to say that Ken Wheeler is wrong and that there is no reciprocation within the magnet. Well, the math...
I mean, Ken Wheeler is absolutely right, whether he understands it or not, regarding this. Regarding political economy, he is dead wrong. He is terrible at political and economic analysis.
Says otherwise, and therefore I believe that there is reciprocation between space and counter space. The reciprocation between space and counter space is the cause of energy flow. Yes, I agree that everything is energy flow, but what is the root cause of energy flow? I say the main cause of energy flow is reciprocation between space and counter space. Scientifically speaking, of course. Please feel free to comment below.
Okay, so we have one more video, and then we're going to take a short break. And that video is one of my favorites. It actually led me to a lot of realizations about magnetism that Ken couldn't really explain into simple terms. I don't understand a lot of what he says, and that's the problem. He's very, very difficult to understand. He uses a lot of big, confusing words that aren't really tuned for general audience, maybe more of a academic and scientific mind. So The next video is our third video. It's going into more detail on the missing secrets of magnetism regarding the aether and fluid dynamics. Now, this is very important because something that we overlook in science is fluid dynamics in quantum systems. And if you look at how we utilize the water analogy for electricity, and this is almost universal in the academic realm of electrical engineering and such, where we will utilize the fluid dynamics analogy of water through a pipe to visualize and understand the dynamics of electricity through a circuit. But then we completely ignore the fluid dynamics of the aether when it concerns magnets. And that is the most important missing secrets of magnetism here. And let's bust out that video because it is mind-blowing. If you have not seen this yet, it will shatter your world.
Or ask me any question. Since I'm calling this video series Understanding Ken Wheeler's Missing Secrets of Magnetism,
Good afternoon, Tammy.
I thought
How
it was
you doing?
about time
Glad
that
you
I
could
did a
make it.
video on magnets. My approach is going to be quite different than Ken's approach. What I will attempt to do is to combine the language of Ken Wheeler with the language of another independent researcher, Robert Distinti. Also, in order to make this a bit more fun for me, I'm going to pretend that I'm an alien from another planet that came to Earth to try to teach you a different cosmology. Obviously, if there is intelligent life on other planets, then they would have come to understand the universe in a very different way than we did. They would have a different language. They would say things differently. My name is Fractal Woman, and I am from planet Budabrot. On our planet, we have a very different view of magnetism, and that is what I'm going to talk about today. On our planet, we discovered charge before we discovered magnets. So our language is based on what we learned from moving charges. Here is what we discovered and how we discovered it. First, we start with two parallel wires hooked up to some charge source. When the charges pass through the wire in the same direction, we found that the wires were attracted to each other. Then we did the same experiment with two parallel wires, only this time we sent the charges in opposite directions. What we found was the wires repelled each other. So we came up with a rule. Same attract and opposites repel. Now, our people are a lot like your people in that we are very stubborn. And so, when we come up with a rule, we like to stick with the rule. Same attract and opposites repel. So then we decided to coil the wires to see what would happen. We sent the current in the same direction in the first set of coils, and we sent the current in opposite directions in the second set of coils. To our surprise, the coils of a wire with the current going in the same direction repelled, and the coils of a wire with the current going in opposite directions attracted. Now it seemed that opposites attract and same repel. But being the stubborn beings that we were, we didn't want to give up on our rule. Same attract and opposites repel. It didn't take long before we realized what was going on. So let's take a closer look. When the current is flowing from bottom to top, like the coils in this image, the currents in both coils appear to be moving in a clockwise direction when viewed from above. Keep in mind that clockwise and counterclockwise are arbitrary concepts that depend on the perspective of the viewer. This is why I am specifying that we look at the coils from above the coils. This is our convention. As you can see, when the coils are next to each other, the currents closest to each other are flowing in opposite directions. So this doesn't contradict our rule after all. When the currents are moving in opposite directions, the coils repel. Now, let's look at the second case. When the current is flowing from bottom to top in one coil, the one on the left, then the current appears to be flowing in a clockwise direction when viewed from above the coils. But when the current is flowing from top to bottom, like the coil on the right, then the current appears to be flowing in a counterclockwise direction when viewed from above. In this case, the currents next to each other are flowing in the same direction. Remember our rule, same attract. When currents are moving in the same direction, the coils attract. So our rule, same attracts and opposites repel, still holds true. Remember, the Buddha-Brahtians are very stubborn people, and once we make a rule, we like to stick with the rule. Also remember that we discovered all of this before we discovered magnetism. Our discoveries and our language were completely founded in the way that currents move in a wire. Then we discovered magnets. We noticed that there were physical objects in nature that were not connected to any circuit, but were able to attract and repel each other. We soon learned how to make these objects and use them to advance our civilization, but we still didn't know exactly how they worked. At first, we thought that maybe they behaved like parallel wires, and that there was some sort of current flowing through the objects longitudinally, and that was causing them to attract and repel. But this turned out to not be the case. When these objects were placed next to each other in the same orientation in which they were made, they would repel each other. And when they were placed next to each other in the opposite orientation in which they were made, they would attract. In other words, they acted more like the coils and less like the parallel wires. So we hypothesized that there was some sort of current circulating in and around the magnet, analogous to the current circulating in a coil of wire, and that this was the cause of attraction and repulsion in the magnet. But currents of what? We hypothesized that the vacuum of space was filled with a fluid of some kind, what you humans used to refer to as the ether. We speculated that these special objects were able to spin up the fluid ether in and around the magnet, generating currents that would then result in attraction and repulsion, analogous to what we saw in the coils. To test this hypothesis, we spun a couple of cylinders in a pool of water and watched their behaviors. Here is a video of one of these experiments. In this video, the cylinders are spinning in opposite directions. The spinning cylinders generate currents in the water surrounding the cylinders. When these cylinders are spinning in opposite directions, the currents generated between the two cylinders will be moving in the same direction. Therefore, according to our rule, same attracts, the cylinders should attract, and they do. In this experiment, the cylinders are spinning in the same direction. Again, this is going to generate currents in the water surrounding the cylinders. When the cylinders are spinning in the same direction, the currents generated between the two cylinders will be moving in opposite directions. Therefore, according to our rule,
Yeah, this all blew my mind when I first saw
these
it.
cylinders
I was like,
should
yeah,
repel,
it
and
snapped.
they do.
Everything snapped together. I was like, yeah,
So
it makes sense.
it seems
like a magnet.
plausible that the function of the magnet could in fact be described by and explained by fluid dynamics. So nothing we have shown so far contradicts our original statement that same attracts and opposites repel. Of course, when we say same attracts and opposites repel, we are talking about the directions of current flow. So if there are currents flowing around magnets, then there should be some evidence of it, right? There should be some experiment that we could do to see the effects of this current. This is where the CRT experiments come in handy. But before we get to the CRT experiments, I want us to do a little thought experiment. When you ask an earthling, especially one that is a physicist, what is the most important part of a magnet, they will quickly reply, the poles. But if you ask the same person, what is the most important part of a gyroscope, they will reply, the flywheel. Of course, the poles are not the most important part of a gyroscope. This seems obvious. What I am suggesting here is that the so-called magnet also has a flywheel. The flywheel is what drives the gyroscope, and the flywheel is what drives the magnet. The spinning currents in and around the magnet are analogous to the flywheel of a gyroscope. So here is a simplified drawing of a flywheel. It is spinning in a clockwise motion when viewed from the top. Now, we are going to pretend that this large cylinder is a CRT screen, and at the front of the screen is a thin film of fluid.
I love this experiment.
Think of it like a waterfall falling from top to bottom. Now, we're going to move the spinning flywheel in the direction of the screen until it intersects the fluid. What do you think will happen? If the flywheel was not spinning, the water would just flow past and around the cylinder of the flywheel in a symmetrical manner. But when the flywheel is spinning, as shown here, the water will splash from left to right when the flywheel intersects the water. If we now reverse the direction of the spinning flywheel and bring it to the screen, the water will now splash from right to left when the flywheel intersects the screen. Next, I'm going to show you two movies. These movies show what happens when you bring a large neodymium magnet close to a CRT screen. In this video, the south pole is pointing up and the north pole of the magnet is pointing down. When the magnet gets really close to the surface of the screen, a large black void forms. The black void is analogous to the flywheel intersecting the fluid in the previous slides. The flywheel of the magnet is displacing the field, which is analogous to the fluid, at the front of the CRT screen. You can see in this experiment that the flywheel of the magnet is splashing the fluid from left to right. This experiment shows that the flywheel of the magnet must be spinning in a clockwise fashion when viewed from above. In this video, the north pole is pointing up and the south pole is pointing down. When the magnet gets close to the screen, the black void forms again. Again, this black void is analogous to the flywheel intersecting the fluid in the previous slides. Only this time, the fluid is splashing from right to left. This means that the flywheel of the magnet must be spinning in a counterclockwise motion when viewed from above. So, these experiments seem to vindicate our rules. Same attracts and opposites repel. When currents are flowing in the same direction, wires and magnets and cylinders attract. When currents are flowing in opposite directions, wires and magnets and spinning cylinders and water repel. Same attracts. Opposites repel. So what does this mean for gravity? Gravity attracts, but it doesn't repel. Unfortunately, we're going to have to save that for another day.
All right, so that's a lot to think about regarding magnets.
Welcome to the last stretch of the conference. I want to
All right, everybody, so we're going to take a short break here, and when I come back, I'm going to continue with a couple of tie-in chapters from the Practical Guide to Free Energy Devices that are pretty relevant to the topic here today of the missing secrets of magnetism and space, counter space, and specifically the aether. So let's take a short break, and we'll be back with some more. Oh, and at the end, I have a special announcement about my research with the Rodin coil. Just a short one, but some kind of breakthrough happened last night, and I'd like to announce it.
With this design, there is a slight smell of burnt air, but almost no sense of carbon emissions when putting your nose directly up to the exhaust. The brilliance of Bendel's design is in its simplicity and ability to replicate natural phenomenon. Further proof that nature is the most efficient energy machine. This is a plasmoid thunderstorm generator gas engine retrofit and industrial engine retrofit. They are proof of concepts for clean and efficient energy. This retrofit will turn any carbon engine into clean and super efficient oxygen factories using only gas for the initial start of the engine. For more details on how the Bendel engine works or how plasmoids are the future of renewable clean energy, subscribe to my TikTok or YouTube channel. I constantly push the bar by introducing you to forbidden and obscure knowledge. Take the red pill and subscribe now. I need your absolute attention for a moment. Please, pay attention to the video you are about to watch and see if you can notice the problem.
It's an interesting character for me. It's not necessarily somebody you'd think that I am right off the bat be playing. A lot of people say, you could play Truman. Sure. But it's like, it was a tough job for me.
Did you see it? Some of you might have even seen it, but don't know how to describe it. What you just witnessed was a micro-expression, and even though it only lasted a fraction of a second, it could tell us everything we need to know. A moment of contradiction between emotion and words. Robin Williams' last video interview was with The Talk in 2014. In the interview, he discussed his new show called The Crazy Ones, and shared some stories from his past. Here we see Robin in a moment of what appears to be slight joy, talking about playing Truman, and then a flash of extreme sadness. And it doesn't just happen once. These are clear patterns of behavior that are universal. Have you ever wondered what someone is thinking? I'm not talking about those sideshow scammers you see grifting in the strip malls, preying on the desperate. I'm talking about a way to really know what someone's truly feeling. If we were looking at the world through the lens of Dr. Paul Ekman, maybe we could have spotted this contradiction. Eastern Highlands Province, Papua New Guinea. A mountainous region of the Papua New Guinea highlands, between the upper reaches of the Ambulum and Okapa rivers. Dr. Paul Ekman, a renowned psychologist who specialized in the study of nonverbal communication and facial expressions, is just finishing up his second year studying the facial expressions of the four people when he reaches a startling discovery. From 1967 to 1969, Dr. Ekman was interested in their facial expressions and whether they were universal or culturally specific. He found that the four people had the same repertoire of facial expressions as people in the Western world, which further supported his theory that facial expressions and emotions are innate and universal. This research with isolated tribes helped him to further refine his theories and develop his understanding of how facial expressions work, which has been invaluable to his work on micro-expressions. Dr. Ekman recorded their interactions and studied their facial expressions while teaching them how to read emotions from Western faces. His work with the four people helped him to develop a comprehensive theory of micro-expressions called the facial action coding system. Micro-expressions are subtle, fleeting facial expressions that occur within a fraction of a second and reveal a person's true emotions or feelings.
There are two kinds of facial expressions, a macro or normal expression, which comes on and off the face usually in 2 to 5 seconds, and a micro expression, which goes on and off in a 25th of a second. Now, if you use slow motion or freeze frame, a micro expression looks just like a normal expression, but it's been compressed in time. It's an attempt to conceal true feeling.
These expressions can occur when a person tries to conceal their true emotion or feelings, and they can be a reliable indicator of lying or deception. Micro-expressions typically last for a fraction of a second and are often difficult to observe. However, with practice, it is possible to develop the skills to identify these subtle expressions and understand their meaning.
Here is the really interesting thing about Paul Ekman. I'm scared to be around him.
Yeah, I was very kind of paranoid when he was around.
You just assume that he is going to just like peer right into your soul, and he's going to basically give you a printout of all of your bull.
To spot a lie using micro-expressions, it is important to look for inconsistencies between the person's verbal and nonverbal behavior.
Colleagues have touched on counterfeit goods, and I share their concerns very deeply. I'm also concerned about stolen goods. Mr. Bezos, are stolen goods sold on Amazon?
Just that with over 1 million sellers, I'm sure that it has happened.
For example, if someone is saying one thing but their facial expression suggests something else, it could indicate that they are not telling the truth. There are different types of micro-expressions, each corresponding to a different emotion. The 7 universal emotions are happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, disgust, and contempt. Spotting micro-expressions of these emotions can be useful in detecting deception. In summary, understanding micro-expressions and how they work can be a powerful tool in spotting lies. It takes practice to become skilled in identifying these subtle facial expressions, but with time and effort, it is possible to develop this essential skill. Dr. Paul Ekman's theory proposes that facial expressions are universal and innate, meaning that they are hardwired into the brain and can be observed across different cultures, languages, and ethnic groups. FACS has been widely used in various fields, such as psychology, sociology, and forensic science, to understand the emotions, intentions, and attitudes displayed through facial expressions. You have to realize, the average person lies 3 times per 10 minutes of conversation.
The question is never simply if someone is lying, it's why.
For more information on micro-expressions and how to train yourself to become a human lie detector, visit Dr. Ekman's page linked in my YouTube description. For more content like this, like and subscribe to my YouTube and TikTok channels, and stay tuned for more. From everyone here at Beneficence TV, we wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Expand your minds and subscribe today.
Alright, I hope you all enjoyed my micro-expression video. It goes into detail about Dr. Paul Ekman and his research. Very fascinating. So we're going to continue with our presentation here. As usual, you can follow along in the link in the description. Let me just pull it up. All right, so I found a couple of interesting tie-ins to this live stream's topic, Missing Secrets of Magnetism. I found a couple of interesting chapters that tie into this subject in the Practical Guide to Free Energy Devices. This is the 2017 edition. If you are not aware, there was 2 editions when I bought it. There might be one more edition left on Amazon. If it's still there, I would grab it. It's a little expensive. It's like $100, $120, but honestly, for the price per page, it's really cheap. I think they're even selling it near or at cost because it's 5 volumes and it covers some really, really great topics. And it's invaluable to my research with the Rodin coil. All right, so this is the chapter from posted on, I think, Reddit from UFO Politics, and it is regarding asymmetrical motors. Get my laptop a second. Okay, here we have a 3-pole asymmetrical motor. It says, this is the simplest of the asymmetrical windings. All coil windings in the same direction, but must all be connected to the exact opposite communicator element as stated in colors and arrows with the wire color codes to input. This motor is either all north rotor poles or all south rotor poles. However, notice it delivers the G out dual coils charge while charging one coil at input. This motor is very powerful and delivers an excellent output. And you can see the north pole and the south pole here are the 3 coils. The communicator brush marked G for generator right here takes away the energy stored in each coil and passes it to an electrical load. Okay, so these coils are inducing a load into this one. The communicator brush marked M for motor feeds energy into the coil from the battery magnet shown in the red, which is driving the motor. The red and blue stripes surrounding the armature are 2 permanent magnets. The magnet shown in red has its south pole facing the armature, and the magnet shown in blue has its north pole facing the armature. This creates a magnetic field flowing horizontally across the armature. The 5-pole arrangement is like this. Ooh, this is interesting. So this is the asymmetrical 5-pole motor. This is a little bit more complicated. Again, this is posted by UFO Politics. He is, I guess, notorious in realms of posting information about free energy devices and the like. I'm just going to read this and I'll go back up to the image. But as you are aware or have been aware if you've been following along on my live streams, you can always follow along on my presentations with the link in the description. It says here is the designation RS, stands for Radio Shack, which is a chain of stores in America. Yeah, I have to emphasize that. I have to describe that for a lot of kids these days who don't know what Radio Shack is. That was a staple in a lot of our upbringings regarding electronics. In the forum, that is sometimes changed to RS and should not be confused with the large electronics outlet radio spares, whose trademark is RS. UFO Politics has suggested that the cheap 5-pole DC motor available from Radio Shack should be used by experimenters to become familiar with rewinding DC motor coils. That's interesting. Maybe I can find one on eBay. Being a cheap product, those motors do not have a particularly high build quality, but they are suitable motors for experiments. Forum members share the details of how they dealt with adapting these and other motors. All right, so let's go back up here and take a look at this asymmetrical 5-pole motor. All right, P. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit here. See if I can zoom in. There we go. There we go. Okay, so it says P1 equals pairs of coils start winding number 1. Okay, so that's your start winding. So your positive and your negative is, I guess, blue, probably to see easier. Blue, red means projecting magnetic fields north-south. Oh, okay, so it's the magnetic field. Interesting. So that's the field geometry, I'm assuming. The lines here. Projecting outwards towards the stators. Okay. All pairs of coils wound in same direction of winding, just like winding one coil. All coils must start from same communicator and all ends at the other side communicator. Communicator elements must be perfectly aligned, upper and lower, so they must be symmetrical. 30, they recommend a 30, or he or she recommends a 30 gauge wire here. I know Mike will definitely find this pretty interesting. So let's continue reading what UFO Politics has to say about this. Where did we leave off? Oh. He says, I have to admit that the motor winding and operation tend to confuse me, and I sometimes find it difficult to understand what UFO Politics means when he talks about different winding strategies. However, it seems reasonably clear at this early stage of form development that his objective is to produce two things: a very powerful electric motor, which can be used in serious forms of road transport as well as for other practical applications, and a powerful motor generator combination which can produce useful generated electrical power. So this can basically render the Tesla obsolete, in my opinion, if somebody can get it running. Unfortunately, I do not recommend patenting or trying to make money off of anything I show you here on this channel. Anything, including the Rodin coil. These devices are meant to study for scientific and educational purposes only. Now, if you want to use them for your own purposes, like saving yourself energy in your house, I can't stop you from doing that. But I don't recommend making money off of these devices. While UFO Politics is very patiently going through many of the possible variations on how a DC motor can be wound and connected, and showing various form members where they have failed to get some of their winding positioned correctly, he has also shown some of the best ways of connecting a rewound motor used as a driver or prime mover, as some people like to call it, and a rewound motor which is to be used as an electrical generator. He shows two important ways for making a very effective motor generator combination as shown here. So here we have the generator on the right and the motor on the left and the output on the bottom. It needs to be realized that these arrangements are not conventional arrangements and that the rewound motors operate in a different way to motors bought off the shelf. So this goes along with the pattern that I noticed in my own research with the Rodin coil, in that it's commonly using unconventional methods to achieve its over unity effect. And what I mean by that is specifically the Nunes method, or what I call the Nunes method, is an open circuit method employed by the likes of Daniel Nunes and others, which is a very unconventional way of hooking up the coil, but it produces more resonance, and that extra resonance adds to the output. And I'll go into more detail on my revelation last night regarding the Rodin coil, specifically my build of it. But let's, for now, move on to the next page here. It says UFO politics comments on these arrangements as followed. As we excite the input of the motor, the generator will start producing energy that additional energy will flow through the motor output side because they are connected in series. That seems to be happening with the Rodin coil that I have. Two rectifiers must be connected at both output terminals, positive and negative, to avoid backflow from closing the circuit back through the load. Oh, and that's what Mike meant. I need to put a rectifier circuit on the output, or on the backflow, on the negative terminal for my breadboard. Maybe that's what I'll do today. Work on that so it will eliminate or maybe mitigate the stereo shutting down at higher outputs. Because, you know, if you've been following these live streams and my research, the stereo, you know, is over unity is a variable that I hadn't considered before when doing testing, in the sense that it's outputting more than it's taking in, so the extra energy going back into the stereo is shutting it down. So I am unable to put the gain up to the maximum that the stereo has programmed. As the motor accelerates, the generator boosts the energy flow, which then runs through the motor, augmenting the output fields, and when the output is loaded, then an engagement of both machines occurs as they start to compensate each other through their output flows. It should be understood that the output should be capacitor banked in a dedicated reservoir. And that's exactly what Daniel Nunes recommends as well with the Nunes method. High voltage 2000 volt capacitor on the output. When designing a generator for a specific existing asymmetrical motor machine, it must be understood that generator interactions should be considered to run as counter rotation to the motor's machine's originally conceived rotation, which is easily done by just moving the brush lines passing Sator bisector angles to the opposite of those needed for the motor. This is a little bit beyond me, to be honest. I don't think I'll be building one of these anytime soon, but I think this might be valuable to Mike's research. I'll have to send him this. Here we go. Here's somebody who apparently tried this. On the forum, Sanskara316 states, I have rewound a small 3-volt 3-pole motor. I used an almost dead 6-volt sealed lead-acid battery to power the motor. This battery just sits around at 4 volts, and if given a load, even a small LED, its voltage drops to 1. The rewound motor starts very slowly, barely spinning. Then after a minute or two, it started to spin faster, and I noticed that the voltage on the battery was slowly climbing. I connected a small LED flashlight to the generator side, and it lit up. Now the battery voltage under load is around 2+ volts. It's been running for an hour now, and the machine squeals a lot. It is conditioning the battery, and the meter cannot be showing what really is happening. The motor draws 300 milliamps. ? That's not possible, as the battery just doesn't have that power. Yeah. Oh, wow. This is amazing. To which UFO Politics remarks, Well, I'm glad that you have witnessed some of the effects. These rewound motors do recondition batteries. Remember, radiant energy is taking over the machine. So radiant energy comes out through the input also, which is the reason why we get high volt amps reading on a meter. Oh, so it comes through the input as well. That makes sense. Why the stereo is shutting down? Because technically, and if you think about it, the way I have the coil connected, channel A and channel B are not hooked up. They're disconnected. They're not in series. So the input channel is A and the output channel is B. They're using some kind of inductance. And the stereo would shut down anyways. I assumed it was flowing back into the stereo, but there was always that question of how, because of the inductance. That makes sense now. Radiant energy flows both ways because it's linear. It doesn't move at an angle. Let's see where we left off. Which is the reason why you get high. Okay, these motors use very small amounts of current and volts. Inside the motor, every coil is being self-electromagnetically pulsed because they auto-disconnect from the power source. Oh. And then the next coil in sequence is assisted by the first coil when it has rotated to its next position, and so on. Huh. The communicator switching has become a self-oscillator for every independently energized coil. Yeah, it's pulsing from one coil to the other. And it's in resonance. Oh, here we go. Here's another forum member. Another forum member, Pochiro, says, I have also replicated the battery charging events that Sanskara 316 indicated. I started with a 12-volt, 4-amp-hour battery, which I had been using for another circuit for about 2 weeks. Or no, he said he was using with another circuit 2 weeks ago and had not recharged it after using it for hours. It was sitting at 12.4 volts. I took my best running rewound motor, plugged it in directly, and ran it. The battery voltage dropped to 12.24 volts and stayed at that level for 30 seconds. The battery voltage then started to rise 1/100th of a volt per minute. When it was at 12.27 volts, I disconnected the motor. The total run time was less than 5 minutes. I then let it rest for 5 minutes. At the end of the 5 minutes, the battery voltage had risen to 12.43 volts and is still at that voltage now. So it's like we hear with the plasmoids, they just embed themselves in stuff and energize even after, stuff's disconnected. This is amazing. This is incredible. Just think of what a larger motor would do on a big battery bank. Everybody needs to document this test as it proves what UFO politics said. This is an independent researcher who just tried what UFO politics was talking about here. And again, this Practical Guide to Free Energy Devices is the latest edition. It has been vetted thoroughly, or as thorough as possible, by the independent researchers and academics who put it together, and basically put it on Amazon for close to no profit on their part. All right, so that is the UFO politics section on the asymmetrical magnetic motor. Again, you can get these pages from the link in the description if you're interested in, reading the full document here. But for now, we are going to move on to Floyd Sweet's vacuum triode amplifier. This is one that I have really wanted to get into for a while now. And it ties into what we're talking about, the missing secrets of magnetism. And we're going to start by watching this video here. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but we're just going to watch a little bit to understand why this ties in to the missing secrets of magnetism.
Two parts.
Oh,
the first part is given by myself, and his device is working for many months. But he has the golden touch. He's a long-time engineer, well practiced in machinery, electronics, and so on. And although he's now over 80, he has the golden touch which is necessary to get these machines working. This talk's divided into two sections, two parts. The first part is given by myself and is devoted to the Floyd Suite VTA, as I've just said. And the second part is given by Don Watson, who's here, who incidentally is no relation. I'm not his father, and he's not my son, as some people have suggested. Don Watson arrived at his VTA, in inverted commas, completely independently of Floyd Suite, purely due to his own experimentation. And all the information which he's got has been arrived at by his own work and from what he found many, many years previous to the publication of the Floyd Suite VTA stuff. So that it's really an independent approach. I met Don Watson here first when we all came together in this conference up in the retreat, and he was able to illuminate several areas of the VTA which Floyd Suite had left obscure or purposely just had not disclosed. Now it's clear that some of the information which Floyd Suite had given me, although not inaccurate, doesn't contain the full truth, or the truth is contained in it, but so heavily masked in rubbish and peripheral material, which is no importance, that it's very difficult to extract the data. But nevertheless, my aim is to actually tell anybody who's interested how to make a VTA. They can go away and do it. It's not a cookbook on how to make a VTA, because there are so many variables and so many parameters that it's actually very difficult to get the thing to work. And it's a question of experience. You've got to try. And in the process of time, it may take you a month or two, you'll get it going.
Jordan from Alchemical
Now,
Science.
the VTA stands, the title VTA stands for Vacuum Triode Amplifier.
Teacher for me as well.
Strictly speaking, it's nothing to do with a vacuum. It's not a triode, and it's really not an amplifier. But this name originates from a theory which Tom Bearden had probably in about 1986, which relates to was his idea of how the VTA functioned. This was in the early days when Floyd Suite was still experimenting on it. I suppose the vacuum may be attributed to the zero-point energy. And the zero-point energy is something which we've heard quite a lot about in this conference. So possibly you can regard the energy as being sourced by the zero-point energy, and so the vacuum thing it's just possible that you could call it a vacuum, but it's a misleading name. It would be better, in fact, to call it a magnetic amplifier, because it's a self-exciting magnetic amplifier. Now, the magnetic amplifier hasn't been around for some while. It was used a great deal during the First World War and the Second World War, and it is, in fact, very rugged. I won't go into the theory of magnetic amplifiers. It's possible to find it in the literature for those that are interested. The difference between the magnetic amplifier and the Floyd suite device is that the magnetic amplifier requires, like any amplifier, a power supply, whereas the Floyd suite's device is self-exciting. That is to say, it sources its own power. Now, we don't know where the power comes from, but of course, the zero-point energy is the favorite buzzword at the present moment. And I think probably that's a good start anyway. But we really have no idea how the device functions. The device consists of a barium ferrite slab, which, can we just have that on a minute? Which you can see here. Now, I'd just like to say here that there are several versions of this device. Floyd Suite has operated a twin magnet device or a single magnet device. Now, he has told me this is the simplest way of doing it, so just use one magnet. But I'm not too sure. I suggest anybody who wishes to try the experiment, in fact, uses two magnets, face-to-face, with on the north-south way, in other words, in attraction mode. Now, this is a magnet which is 6 inches by 4 inches by 1 inch thick. It's barium ferrite, as I said, and around this magnet are wound coils like so. If you go downstairs in the equipment room, you'll see my version of this. The coils alone are there. I couldn't bring the magnet over. It wasn't conditioned anyway, but I couldn't bring it over because magnetic materials, especially for transatlantic flights, are protected items. Yeah, not protected items. You know, you can't put them in baggage and so on. They won't allow you to do it because it might upset the compasses or something like that. So that basically I just bought the coils. Now it turns out that Don Watson has a magnet of the same size but half the thickness down there, which will give you an idea of what the magnet is like. Returning to the barium ferrite thing, it's absolutely essential that it's barium ferrite. Yes, sorry, the field goes straight through it. That's north on this face and south on the underface. So the whole thing is like that. This is when you buy it. But as I shall point out in a minute, the process of conditioning changes the magnetic configuration considerably. And this is the important thing. Due to shortage of time, I'll have to sort of accelerate the procedure a bit.
Are these in the proceedings, these diagrams?
These diagrams are in the proceedings, but what I'm about to say now is not completely in the proceedings, because I've modified my views somewhat. It's so fluid, this business, that it's changing all the time. Now, I'll get on straight to the conditioning thing. We know that it's possible to do this with two magnets. The coils are wound on the 3 axes there. Note the names A, B, and C coil and the way in which they're wound, because I'll refer to those. You see the structure of the machine there. As you go down, as I said, into the equipment room, you'll see this things like this down there. This wire is 19 American gauge, which is 1 millimeter European. It's the normal standard insulated copper wire.
What gauge was that?
It's 19 American gauge, roughly, approximately, 1 millimeter. Now, the conditioning. Sorry.
Is it annealed? Is it tinned? Is it enameled?
Oh, it's the usual enamel instrument wire, magnet wire, I think you call it here. It's polyurethane covered because it's easy to deal with, that's all. Any enameled copper wire. Okay? Now, the conditioning of the VTA. The conditioning of the VTA consists in a process of controlled demagnetization.
Just to reduce the EMF
It's done by applying a large high-energy pulse to these coils, which are wrapped around the magnet. Now, let me just illustrate a little bit exactly what happens. This coil, the A coil, where is it? There, that A coil has got about 500 turns on it, and it's fine enameled copper wire as usual, instrument wire. The resistance for that in my case is about 70 ohms. and it's round with about, I think it's about 30 gauge, 28 or 30 gauge. This is the English gauge, so it's very similar to the American gauge. It doesn't matter, it's not important, but it should have about 500 turns on it. The impedance at 50 or 60 hertz should be reasonably high. Now, these coils here have got about 100 turns on them. The C coil and the B coil have 100 turns each. I say approximately because it's important to get the length of wire the same rather than the number of turns. In other words, we're more interested in the resistance of the wire than we are in its inductance.
On B and C.
On B and C.
So they're all about 500 turns, or?
It's about 100 turns. On B and C is 500 turns. A is 500 turns, B and C is 100 turns each. roughly. Because the perimeter of the C coil is greater, so it's about 115 on one and about 90 on the other. When you come to do it, best to get the same length of wire to give you approximately the same fairly accurately the same resistance, and then wind it on. Not very accurately. I would say they should be within about 5%. Sorry?
So the resistance should be the same on A, B, and C?
No, just B and C. The A coil has got many more turns, and it's sort of out of this equation just for the minute. I'll tell you what the A coil is for. The A coil is the excitation coil. If you ever finally get it working, that's the place where you put your AC input signal, which is a small, low-energy signal which sets the thing into oscillation. Now, the process of conditioning consists of connecting these coils in parallel. The B and the C coil, The B and the C coil are connected in parallel, start to start, finish to finish. And a 500 or so joule pulse is applied, one single pulse at a time. You'll have to do this because the capacitors take so long to charge up. But you need to do this with electrolytic capacitors, some sort of thyristor triggering device, and some sort of detector for the zero crossing of the 50 hertz in our case European standard, but 60 hertz signal which is applied onto the A coil. I'll go through that again. What you've got is this. You have a 60 hertz 1 amp current flowing through the A coil, okay, from some source. Transformer will do. Doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be 1 amp, be 2 amps or half an amp or something of that order. The current is not particularly important, but it should be significant, say about 1 ampere, through the A coil. Remember, the resistance of the A coil is of the order of 50, 60, 70 ohms. Now, during the... If you... it's difficult to draw it from here, but if you... the AC waveform coming in on the A coil, it's important to, at the point, the maximum peak point of the AC signal going in on the A coil, it's important that you synchronize the firing of the pulse. It must be coincident with the peak of the AC signal going in on the A coil. It must be. You must make sure that it's synchronous. If it's out of sync, it won't work. Sorry?
Can you say that one more time?
Yes. You've got an AC signal going in on the A coil, and you have the capacity to pulse the B coils. You must synchronize the pulse on the B and C coils, which are connected in parallel, with the peak of the AC waveform going in on the A coil, which is A.
HK states, interesting, a lot of this is just manipulation of wave functions via various artifacts to produce evos. Yeah. Yep, exactly. As we were reading earlier from UFO Politics insights on asymmetrical magnetic motors, there was a person who replicated on the forum that he posted, replicated one of his posts and found that the battery was continuing to increase in voltage slightly while it was disconnected and maintained that extra voltage for a long time, I guess. I don't know, he didn't specify, but.
See, which is 50 hertz. Sorry?
Voltage or current?
Voltage.
Positive or negative?
Pardon?
Positive or negative?
I'll come to that in a minute.
How big a pulse?
Well, I'll come to the pulsing too. The pulse is a good pulse. It's about 500 joules energy. Now, you should arrange the direction of the pulse to be opposite to the signal going in on the A coil. In other words, if it's a positive peak, if the magnetization field is round here on the A coil, you should arrange it to the positive peak. There's a negative going pulse. The importance of this is it's not actually so important with this configuration, but when you come to see Don Watson's configuration, which is different, it's very important that you get the directions of the pulses correct. You'll have to find out whether it actually is important in your particular configuration. In mine, I had to make sure that the pulse was negative going when it was positive on the A coil here. Whether it was there, it's not to the here. The 40 is produced. I'll come to why I put strontium there as well in a minute. You see that the normal remnant flux is about 4,000 Gauss. Now, with barium ferrite, the knee occurs at about 2,000 Gauss. This is Weber per square meter here. Now, as you see, at that point, after the knee, it descends very steeply. And this coercivity here is 140,000 amp turns, roughly. You don't take it through the loop, but what happens, because if you're up here and you demagnetize a barium ferrite magnet, it recoils back up here again. But if you go down here after the knee, you find that if you apply the pulse effectively applies a demagnetizing force in this direction, it goes down here and it recoils up to somewhere here. And that recoil line, are no longer parallel like they usually are when the magnet is running in its proper mode. So in other words, this slope is unknown. And this means that the remnant flux, which has got to be about 30 or 40 Gauss, you have to find out what pulse amplitude you need to get it to be like that. And it differs from magnet to magnet. It differs from the magnetic field. The magnetic field will respond. When it's conditioned, the magnetic field will move across the surface of the magnet rather in the way as though it were mercury under the influence of a magnetic field. It'll move easily and quickly. And that's brought about by this electrostatic field. Why it happens, how it happens, I don't know. That's the calcium, but that may only take a few seconds. So it probably does. You may find a pulse is sufficient. But it's extraordinary. Evidently the magnetic field which you apply in the form of the pulse can't excite the barium atom itself. But the extra high voltage EHT you apply to it, 20 kV, does manage to succeed in doing this. It brings the barium atom into a state which it can't normally be in from a magnetic flux. It requires the electric field to bring about this change.
Do you do that while you apply the excitation field?
You can, and that's probably a better way of doing it. I mean, there's some sort of experiments I can suggest, which I haven't done, is to, instead of having that A coil on there, which applied the 50 hertz, is to
considered using a capacitor and stress the barium atom while it's in operation, keep it at the metastable state.
Yeah. That sounds like a good idea. Because they do die, and this because it jumps out of this metastable state.
Resonance, and you put the coils in series and drive it to resonance.
Right. Absolutely. There's several different, we try these experiments. This is what I'm trying to say. Trying to make all this stuff public domain so people will experiment and find their own combinations and conditions. All that we've done is touched upon a couple of the obvious ones. Things. No.
Talking about it with, and I feel that it helps me, is during the conditioning process, I'll fire one charge into the magnet, and I'll look at the magnet for impurities. One of the ways of the impurities, if I'm getting spurious amounts or bubbles, or should I say regions of reverse polarities across the face of the magnets itself, then I have to go back and start over again, remagnetize the magnet conventionally, and start this process again. This is how I look for a pair of magnets in order to balance them, a balanced set of magnets. Okay? After I do this, and I do get a set that is working properly, I leave it in the state that it's in, and then that's when I go to the electrostatic stage. Now, let me give you a little bit of story on how I got to this electrostatic stage. I've got some experimentation that I have done myself on a completely and totally foreign configuration of using barium ferrite magnets. I use the round cores with one feeding through the other like a chain link. And in utilizing that, the experimentation and this electrostatic charging that I'm doing here is what I did on mine, which goes back to the age of 15, 16 years old. So I would say that's a good 15 years from here, past. Now, once after this is done, and please don't ask me what this does, there is theories, there's several theories to this. All I know is that once this here is done, I go back to where I had the bubble and find that the bubble that I had just placed into the magnet itself is easily movable by external forces. Okay, first of all, the walls, or the transition point between north-south, is very hard to move. You bring an external magnet to this, and it just doesn't want to move anywhere. It's real stiff. After the electrostatic stage, I found that the bubble has loosened some and making it a lot easier, whereas if I had a magnet I brought across near the magnet here, I can now bring it to a distance of here to achieve the same effect.
How do you observe the motion of
There's a green plastic paper that I get from a magnetic company. This is called MagnaView. What this does is it's like little tiny filings of metal particles sandwiched in between two sheets of plastic, perhaps, or there's another substance on the back that I'm not familiar with. But when this is placed upon a magnet, and I have one here, if any of you, if you want to pass this around briefly, if anybody wants to look at this, by moving the paper around, you can see the bubble that is in this magnet here in this configuration.
If I make a suggestion, be careful about getting it close to the credit card.
Right.
So he's got a bubble
if you get any credit cards, keep the magnet far away from you.
Where it's
especially
north,
if you use your
edge, like
room
it's
key and
south.
put it in your shirt pocket and you're up here, you won't get back in your room. Now, as Mike was describing before, the center portion of this does lose its gauze, or loses its field slightly, during this process or in the beginning of the process. Now, whether the techniques that I'm using to make this happen, whether it works in that defined order or whether a different order can be done, I don't know, because this is the way I generally did the cores that I used in my experiments.
Do you use the capacitive discharge?
Right. The passive discharge, which was on the other slide that I had up here, I put this one up here to help Mike be able to present his in what way that the static was done. He may have done his a little bit different, but basically it's the same. Okay. Now, this is where we get to the coil configurations of the VTA duplicate. Now, here's one thing about this situation. The one I duplicated uses a small set of magnets, like this that I'm holding here. I did not go to the 4x6 plates like he did. I used a smaller version of it. The effects that I've got here was at one time 67 volts. I'm going to say slightly less than 1 amp, but it did power a light bulb that normally ran on 120 volts. That that the input, which is a 9-volt battery going into 555 timer circuitry in order to induce the sine wave, did not, in fact, cause the light to light up. Bifilar coil arrangement, I used the parallel bifilar arrangement, which this is a simple schematical diagram here showing the bifilar coils on the output section, which is this coil that is along the axis of the magnet fields. And this one here being the input coil, which is running across 90 degrees perpendicular to the output coil, sandwiched in between the two magnets. You can bring it up just a little bit. At this point, and I probably got about 30 seconds left here, is I inject an AC signal into this output coil at the same time that the conditioning coils, there's an example of one of them here. This is a conditioning coil used. It sits on the outside of the magnets themselves. And feed the pulse, of course, on the same cycle rating that Mike Watson was talking about, except he was talking about positive. It doesn't matter if it's positive or the negative pulse, as long as your polarities is right, and you have to kind of play around with this to find out. One of the ways is by looking at the transitional lines on the original bubble that you have formed in it for increase in width or decrease in width will tell you if your polarity of your AC coil is correct when you induce the charge. The charge has to be done several times, and there are instances where you have to take, and in this case you've got a solid magnet, and you, by certain tilts and turning the magnet around inside this, giving it several different charges. Of course, anytime you make one tilt, you want to make sure that you give it a charge on the opposite tilt as well.
All right. If you are interested in watching the full Don Watson, Mike Watson presentation on the vacuum triode amplifier, that is linked to in the guide for my presentation today in the description of this live stream video. So, moving on to the practical guide to free energy devices and what that has to say about the subject of Floyd Sweet's vacuum triode amplifier. All right, so it says anyone wanting to try to replicate this device will need to experiment with the number of turns in each coil, and the wire diameter needs to carry the desired current. Stephen states that you need to have at least twice the weight of copper in the black output coils as there are in the blue input coils in order to allow the device to produce excess power. Twice weight of copper in the output. Interesting. Yeah, because usually a step up transformer will require the primary to have more winds than the secondary, implying more weight to the coil. But that's interesting because that relates to my revelation last night that I will get into after this regarding the road coil and my frustrations with my roadblock and the Nunez method. It says the first page of this appendix shows the current carrying capacity for each of the standard wire diameters commonly offered for sale. As this is fairly recently released circuit, I am not aware of any replications of it at this time. And says the device was capable of producing more than 500 watts of output power at 120 volts, 60 hertz, requiring less than 1/3 of a milliwatt as input power. What? Less than 1/3 of a milliwatt of input power. That is insane. And this guy was an absolute genius. This says the output power can operate AC motors, lights, heaters, and when rectified, DC motors. And there's a materials list here in the guide. I'm sorry I don't have that typed up for you. You'll have to type it up yourself. But and I don't know if the link is still active. I hope it is if you're interested in exploring this. Just as a warning, these presentations and guides are never to be monetized. These devices should never be monetized. They are only for scientific and in educational purposes only. Recently, some additional information on Floyd Sweet's device has been released publicly by an associate of Floyd's who goes by the name of Maurice, and who, having reached the age of 70, has decided that it's time to release this additional information. That information can be found in the appendix. Oh, okay. I'll have to save that for an addendum for this live stream at some point in the future. I am not aware of anybody who has succeeded in replicating Floyd's VTA, but here is as much information as I have at this time. In the above video, Floyd talks about separating two of his conditioned permanent magnets. Oh, it's actually Floyd talking? I might load that up if that's Floyd talking. I know I have limited resources on this laptop, so I try not to do too much on it. But we might, if it works, we might be seeing a little extra video here that I had not planned. It says, in the video, Floyd talks about separating two of his conditioned permanent magnets with an air gap, which is astonishing as he is putting them on opposite sides of a length of aluminum channel with thick walls, and aluminum has a major dampening effect on magnetic fields. That's interesting. This arrangement, which seems quite mad, is confirmed by a picture from Floyd's lab, as shown here. This shows clearly that the open ends of the channels are not between the two magnets, allowing an unrestricted magnetic field to flow between them, but instead, two channel thickness of aluminum are between the two magnets, obstructing the magnetic flow. Quite remarkable. Floyd shows two coils being used to condition the magnets in this picture. The first is a large vertical coil shown here in front of Floyd. These are terrible pictures. I wish we had some better, higher quality pictures of this. This guy was an amazing engineer. The second coil is not seen as it is inside the vertical coil. Yeah, so it's inside this coil right here. A coil inside a coil, a nested coil. He was using a nested coil. And that's interesting because Jordan from Alchemical Science has a nested coil frame design that he's working on, or that he made. And at some point, I'd like to wind that one. That's going to be really hard to wind, though. Says this coil operates effectively as an air coil solenoid, like my Rodin coil, producing a strong axial magnetic field inside the larger coil, which surrounds it. This inside coil is driven by a sine wave signal in the 10 Hz to 15 Hz range, boosted through a 100-watt audio amplifier, which provides the current needed to impose the sine wave on his low impedance coil without distorting the waveform. The first step is to determine the resonant frequency of each of the two permanent magnets to be used. The ferrite magnets used appear to be 6 by 4 by 1 inch, as they will eventually be used as a pair. One end of each is marked so they can be aligned in the correct orientation after conditioning. The conditioning process we saw earlier, I'm assuming, where he has a little bubble that appears of north and then an outer edge of south, which is, it's a very, I don't know how you would do that. That's very, very strange. I've never heard of a magnet like that. But apparently it's possible. I mean, the dude was passing one around in the video. So, I mean, I wasn't there at the conference. But I guess he was pretty confident in that sample there. The inside low-frequency coil is powered up at around 12 hertz, the length of the magnet aligned with Earth's magnetic field, that is north-south, and placed on top of the vertical coil. An iron shim, as used in transformer coil construction, is placed vertically on top of the magnet as an indication of resonating. So basically, you have to tune the magnets. Let's see this. In April 2014, I was sent some information about a colleague of Floyd Sweet's, Ashley Gray of Nelson, New Zealand. The version described by Ashley appears to be understandable. On the 20th of June, 1994, Ashley says, after a trip to America in 1985, when I was first introduced to Floyd Sweet, I was invited to go back and work with him. At that time, he was being funded by Mark Golds of the Aesop Institute, and Daryl Roberts was working as co-coordinator for the Institute in LA. After working with Floyd for some time, we left America for England. At that stage, the politics had become difficult. When we were in England, we were contacted by Mark Golds and told that Floyd had obtained some results which they would like us to verify for them. On our return to New Zealand, Daryl Roberts sent us the lab notes which he had recorded during the first test of the Space Quanta Modulator and its construction details. That's weird. Must be some kind of code name. We were asked to repeat the experiments to verify the results. We constructed the device, but were unable to get any results at that time. In the light of the new information we had been released, I conducted some further experiments and managed to obtain some interesting results without magnet conditioning, which, as far as I was aware, was not used in the original device. And that's the conditioning process I'm assuming we saw in the video. The initial device, which I constructed in America, consisted of two 1-inch by 1-inch neodymium magnets mounted in a steel frame. There were two modulating windings and one output winding. It was driven by a specially built sine wave oscillator, which was adjustable from 1 kilohertz to 2 kilohertz. We did not get any output or significant result from this device. Floyd felt that this was due to the high field strength of the neodymium magnets and the closed magnetic path. Yeah, so he used the field geometry of the magnets in his conditioning process in a very specific way, and their magnets were just too powerful. It was overriding that path of flow that he had created for the aether. Floyd did not mention anything about magnet conditioning being necessary. So no conditioning is necessary. Maybe the video has it wrong. The conference people who were trying to replicate this, they thought they were trying to had to condition the magnet, and they didn't have to. Ashley appears to be using magnets which are not conditioned. Ashley has had what I consider to be very significant results from this prototype with an output power of 111 watts, 111, for an input of just 0.001 watts. A COP of 111,000. Ashley's successful build has an aluminum housing. People get the very mistaken idea that aluminum is not magnetic because magnets do not stick to it. The reality is aluminum has a really major effect on magnetic fields and can be used as magnetic shielding if thick enough. Ashley design uses two coils at right angles of each other, and that style of operation can be seen in other free energy devices. Anyways, take a look at the version built by Ashley. This is her version right here. of the Floyd Suite Vacuum Triode Amplifier from the Practical Guide to Free Energy Devices, 2017 edition. And we have a bonus video for y'all.
In a world where innovation is stifled by greed and corruption, there lies a hidden truth that could revolutionize our way of life.
Lenny, what are you doing? Are you seriously pitching a new show right now? I didn't authorize this. My God, only 5 minutes into your new position as co-host, and you're already adding to my tight schedule.
Yes, sir, I manage that schedule. But I did notice you have an entire 2 days available during your week.
Wait, you're not talking about Saturday and Sunday, are you?
Of course, sir. You have two whole days where you're free to work on new content.
Lenny, those are my days off.
It's okay, sir. I know you'll manage just fine. I have faith in you.
Do robots have faith?
I do. I have faith that you won't screw it up again.
You know what? It's fine. Go ahead. I'll just build my cold fusion Lego set some other time.
It's Pond certified.
But I'm not telling them about my idea for a thunderstorm toilet. I'm gonna keep that baby close to my chest.
You know, that just sounds wrong.
It's a good idea. A toilet capable of turning any toxic human waste into, well, it turns into petroleum jelly.
Why petroleum jelly, sir?
You know what? I'm not sure. I don't think it's calibrated correctly.
Enough is enough. The world is at a breaking point. Catastrophic climate change, biosphere collapse, and a global energy crisis have been met with apathy, denial, and despair. The phrase unidentified flying object is a deliberately obfuscating term. What it really is an alternative energy and propulsion device. This is the real reason for the secrecy. These technologies, if they were disclosed, would end fossil fuels, pollution, and poverty overnight, and usher in a new era of abundance, freedom, and peace. Instead, they have been kept secret for over 100 years.
The more powerful the agency, the more powerful the group, the more powerful the cartel, the more they will resort not only to legal means, but to extra legal means to suppress their competition.
I said pretty early on, the problem is suppression. It wasn't really how do I make a free energy machine. It's how do I not get suppressed? Because what's the point?
Microscopic ball lightnings that when they discharge are tapping into that 0-point energy field and creating the motive force.
Boom! That's why the concussion from the thunderclap is so huge. There's this huge amount of energy that's actually sourced from the vacuum energy. All the dots connected. This is what's happening, right? So we need to make the thunderclap engine.
Imagine a future where clean, sustainable energy is not just a dream, but a reality. Discover the countless untold stories of free energy devices and the relentless battle against those who seek to suppress them for their own gain.
Black shelving. So someone comes along, they offer you $20 million for your device, it's a corporation, they put it on a shelf. Boom.
This power is something I have given my life for you the people.
Uncover the shocking tactics used by energy industries to control the narrative and maintain their grip on power.
You don't interfere with the big, powerful people. You don't put them out of business. They still have those 50-year leases on the lines and all the power transformers.
The Environmental Protection Agency is a bit of a dictatorial police agency.
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism,
and the ability to pursue his own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
This is real, usable power. It's stable. It is not transient. It is not noise. Behind the lamps, that little box is putting out all of that power, well over 500 watts, and yet it is receiving less than 1/3 of a milliwatt of input power. The rest of that power is coming out of the surging energy of the vacuum, and this little box that you see right here, solid state, no moving parts, is the vacuum triode that's doing this very practical and historical work. But indeed it put out more energy than it took in. He was shot at once with a silenced rifle from about 300 yards. It reads like a James Bond movie, but it's real.
There are men here that said they're FBI, and they got black vans, and they're taking all this equipment. What should I do?
It's called capture, where they try to rationalize away this problem and everything's fine.
From manipulation of patent authorities to infiltration of government agencies, the truth is stranger than fiction. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerges in the form of renegade scientists and inventors who refuse to be silenced.
There is absolutely no question that T. Henry Morey had a system that produced about 50 kilowatts out of a 55-pound box.
In the shadows of capitalism's dark secrets, join us on a thrilling new show. Get ready to be inspired, enraged, and empowered as we delve into the benefactor's guide to free energy devices.
Only on Beneficence TV.
All right. As of the moment, production for all 3 of my shows have been stopped until I get my computer, my workstation, back online. But we have unlocked memberships. I have to figure out how to enable them. But once they are enabled, members will be able to get those 3 shows a week early. So when I post an episode of The Social Situation or Divine Science or the new show, The Benefactor's Guide to Free Energy Devices, you members will all be able to get it a week early. Oh, you like that, the thunderstorm toilet. Well, definitely we're going to bring back the thunderstorm toilet. Trust me. I've got plans for that, baby. All right, so we're going to end this stream by letting you guys know the revelation I had last night. And as you know, I have been having some issues with the Nunez method, the Nunez open circuit method with the coil. I can get it powered, it's powering a load, but it is not producing the over unity effect like the current configuration I have, which is an inductive method. So I started thinking, well, what happens if I switch the channels? If I switch channel A and channel B, and channel B is now the input, and channel A is now the output. And I started thinking about doing this specifically because I might have screwed up during the manufacturing process. And again, I'm going off of very few pieces of information here and there that I have to kind of piece together. And this is the first time I'm actually making a Rodin coil. So, I screwed up the first couple of wines. And this one, it turns out I might, and I'm 95% sure, there's always 5% until I actually open up the bind and confirm, but I might have actually tightened the bundle well, I did tighten the bundle a little bit too much, I believe, producing microfractures that broke one of the series of wires. So what I had to do was disconnect one of the 12 series of wires for channel B, and I had intended to disconnect one for A to even it out. And apparently, it turns out I might have forgotten to do that. And I updated the Rodin coil guide with this revelation. So it doesn't appear that this has the update. Just checking to see if I have the included. Huh. Okay, so anyways, I tested this hypothesis. And what happened when I tested this hypothesis is it confirmed my hypothesis. And apparently, I might have forgotten to disconnect one of the wires in series with channel A. So as you know, the coil has 12 wires in series each channel, 24 total. And those two channels are not connected. And when one of them broke, that took down channel B from 12 to 11. And now what I should have done is take channel A down from 12 to 11 to even it out. But apparently I forgot to do that. And this essentially turned the coil into a transformer. And we all know it's possible in theory, but I don't think I've seen any videos of anybody using this configuration before. I think I inadvertently stumbled upon the transformer configuration of the coil. And with this configuration, this is crazy, okay? This configuration is actually, because you've seen the numbers, with the new multimeter, it's a little more accurate at reading the milliamps. So as you know, this configuration is producing a 1-to-2 ratio output to input for voltage and for current. So a regular transformer, it will step up current or step up voltage, but at the cost of current. This is stepping up voltage and stepping up current. It's doubling both. So this is very exciting, actually. And I think this is the reason why I haven't been able to get the Nunez method to work, because obviously it's a resonating method. It can't be asymmetrical, that method. That circuit just won't work. You have essentially two coils that are different sizes, and they're not resonating in the same cavity, if that makes any sense. So this is a huge breakthrough for my Rodin coil research. And when I get the courage enough to bust open the bundle of wires I have, because I don't want to damage it, I'll double check and even it out, and then we might be able to get the Nunez method to actually work. Okay, guys, I'm gonna head out. I might be back on later. If not, check me out probably tomorrow, and I have lots of videos you can watch in the meantime. So have a good night. Bye-bye, everybody.